Staying on. Hello, Pallab, are you ready? Pallab, presenting was from. It's both a privilege and an honor to extend a heartfelt welcome to each one of you for today's much anticipated lecture when history becomes a story. We are deeply honored to be joined by two distinguished scholars whose work continues to illuminate the realms of literature, culture, and critical thought, Professor Manju Jaidka and Dr. Navreet. Their collective contributions have significantly enriched the fields of English literature, cultural studies, and interdisciplinary research. Professor Manju Jaidka is an acclaimed academic, poet, novelist, and literary critic with a distinguished career spanning over 4 decades. Formerly the chairperson of the Department of English at Punjab University and Director of Humanities at SRM Universities, he is also the visionary founder and president of MELOW, the Society for the Study of the Multi-Ethnic Literatures of the World. Her academic and creative career spans American literature, Indian English writing, gender studies, and comparative literature. Among her many celebrated publications are Scandal Point, For Reasons Unknown, Hamlet's Avenue, The Seduction and Betrayal of Cat Whiskers, T.S. Eliot's use of popular sources, Confucian and Beyond, The Poetry of Sylvia Plath. Professor Jaidkar's illustrious career has been recognized with prestigious fellowship, including the Fulbright and Rockefeller Awards, as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Chandigarh Sahitya Academy. We have also one more guest, Professor and Dr. Navreet Shahi is an accomplished academic and associate professor at the Chittagong School of Liberal Arts, Solin University, Solan. A gold medalist from Punjab University, he holds a PhD in English and has consistently demonstrated excellence in both scholarship and pedagogy. His her interdisciplinary research spans trickster narratives, peers fiction, psychoanalysis, and gender studies. Her recent book, Trickster or Hero, a cross-cultural analysis of Picaro, is a testament to her insightful engagement with global literary traditions. With over 40 research papers to her credit, Dr. Shahi is also a noted public speaker, having been recognized by the University of Cambridge as one of the India's top 100 speakers. Together, Professor Jaidka and Dr. Shahi embody a powerful confluence of literary scholarship, critical inquiry, and academic excellence. We are truly fortunate to have them with us today, and we look forward to an engaging and intellectually stimulating session. Thank you for once again joining us. Up to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, and welcome to this session when history becomes story. We have Professor Manju Jaidka with us, and she'll be talking to all of you on her very famous and interesting historical fiction novel, Scandal Point. Before I ask her a few questions, I think it'll be pertinent to talk a little bit, introduce you all to the book. So, Scandal Point was published in 2011. It's been almost 15 years, and it's a historical novel. I'm sure all of you would enjoy it. And a very interesting one, as the name signifies, Scandal Point. So it has scandal in it. It intertwines fact and fiction, and it explores a legendary tale from colonial India. It is set in 1892, and the plot of the novel revolves around the romantic elopement of Maharaja Rajendra Singh of Patiala and the British Viceroy's daughter of that time. And it was an event at that time that purportedly led to the naming of Shimla's famed Scandal Point. I'm quite sure a lot of you must have visited that place, and a few of you may have at least heard of it. And that's where the book, takes its name from. And in this novel, the author of Professor Jaidka, she delves into this anecdote of the love story and the elopement story of these two. And she crafts a story that follows their son, who actually is unaware of his own heritage and gradually embarks on a quest to uncover his own origins. And ultimately, we have a novel that not only revisits a captivating episode of colonial history, but also examines various themes such as identity, legacy, ultimately leading to an interplay between personal and political realms. Am I right, ma'am?
Absolutely, Navreet. And I'm so glad you are summing it up this way. And for those of you who are listening, I must tell you that Navreet has been a former student of mine. She did a PhD, MPhil under my supervision, and she's one of those that I'm very proud of. She's shaped up beautifully, as you can see, and she's a very good speaker. She's an award-winning speaker also. And it's a pleasure having her converse with me on this particular panel. So what you say is absolutely right, Navreet. So I've made use of history and I have interwoven it with imagination.
Yes, ma'am. So, it's a kind of a lure of the past that we are presenting to the audience, to the readers. And today we have an audience with us, which is very well versed with history. And I'm sure you're all interested in history also, which is why we also came up with this topic. So, the novel brings us a lure of the past. And I would like to ask you, ma'am, what drew you to this particular moment in colonial history for fictional treatment? And also, why do you think that this story matters today, and especially for students of history?
Before I answer that particular question, I would like to point out that when we use history in fiction, when we use history in creative writing, we are actually giving the story a context, a background, a backdrop against which the action is going to take place. So we give it a certain time and place, and then the action takes place, then the characters are put in, right? Otherwise, yes, we can have a story without any history, without any historical background. We can have a story that can take place anywhere, but that does not happen. For instance, a story that we are narrating today cannot be placed in the 16th century, for instance. Now you have people talking about Insta and Facebook and Twitter and so on, X and so on. You can't place this kind of a dialogue in the 16th century or even a century earlier, can you? No. So when you give it a historical background, you are actually giving it some chronotopic specificities, as they are called. Chronotopic, chronos, and topos. That means time and space. So you give it time and space. Now, uh, so I feel that when you're writing a novel or when you're doing any kind of creative writing, when you're telling a story, you need a backdrop, a certain backdrop, unless you are talking about, fantasy, unless you're doing something like that takes place in fairyland, then you don't need these historical props. You don't need to give it any kind of realism. But in order to bring realism and in order to bring some kind of plausibility, you need some kind of props, historical props in time and characters also. You can bring in characters from the past. For instance, if I want to talk about a certain point in 1970s, probably I'll bring in Indira Gandhi in the background or the emergency or something like that. So that is why we need to make use of history. And we have so many writers, historical novelists. We have the historical novel, which was a very popular genre at one time. And even now we have elements of history coming into literature. For instance, some decades ago, when Salman Rushdie, when he suddenly came onto the literary scene with his Midnight Children, what do we have out there? We have fiction plus reality. We have a certain time frame, and we have imagination weaving in and out of that particular period. Now, your question was, why did I choose this particular story? Or what made me choose it? Things just happen. The human mind does not work in a straight line that, okay, now I'm doing this, next I'll do that. As we know what stream of consciousness is. You have a lot of sensations, a lot of ideas, a lot of, you're bombarded with a lot of influences from all around. So a lot of things are going on, and your mind can go any which way. It can go in this direction or in that direction. And sometimes something happens that triggers off a chain of ideas and it sets you thinking. So that is something that happened once. Shimla is a very popular joint. It's a very popular city. And from Chandigarh, a lot of people go to Shimla. In fact, in the summers, it gets so crowded that, you start wondering, what do these people get, coming here and being jostled around? You get the feeling, and at least I have had this feeling very often. I'm reminded of a crowd flowed over London Bridge, a crowd flowed. I had not thought that death had undone so many, echoes of T.S. Eliot, echoes of Dante. So I often used to think of that, but then there are legends and stories that you find in Shimla, and one of them is the story of Scandal Point. There is one place where there's a bifurcation of roads. There are actually four roads that come together. And there's a little police chowki out there that is called Scandal Point. Why is it called Scandal Point? You ask people, and everybody will give you a different story. And then, if you look up the historical documents, you will not find anything because everything has been erased. So, this is one thing we can talk about, the erasure of certain episodes from history, which are very embarrassing to the powers that be. The erasure, the silences, the silent spots. Okay, so what triggered this chain of thought was just a stray story that I heard about Scandal Point and another viewpoint on the same story. So I said, this is interesting. Let me see what it's all about. It just so happened that that year I was on study leave. And study leave, our universities, some of them, and at least my university was very kind. It used to give us 1 year off once in a while. And you could do what you like. You could say you're writing a book and you could actually write a book. Or if you didn't write a book, you could give a report, a nice, fantastic sounding report at the end. This is what I've done, and my book is under preparation. And well, it was the university was a fantastic place to work in, and you could avail of study leave and just do the kind of things that you want to do. So in that period, I chilled out. Okay, chilled out, and I wrote this book. And the book actually, when I started writing, it did not take long. It came out in 2 months, 2 months flat. It was almost as if I was possessed by the story. You hear about the inspired bard, and I don't believe in it. I am skeptical. But there is something like the inspired bard, because when you are in the grip of a certain idea, of a certain passion, then the thoughts flow and there is nothing stopping you. So it just has to come out. So this was a story that was waiting to be written. And well, when I started reading up on it, I explored the internet and the library. Of course, there was nothing much in the library. So I made a trip to Patiala. And in the Patiala archives, I saw some stray references here and there. About the king, yes. About the viceroy, yes. But nothing about the two characters. The historical romance has these two characters, Rajinder Singh and the viceroy's daughter. So nothing about that. So there was this total silence. And so I surfed some more, went into greater depths, talked to some old timers in Patiala, and whose grandfathers, great grandfathers had worked for the palace. And so I pieced together a lot of information, and then I wrote Candle Point. And I said it came out in 2 months flat.
It sounds very simple to hear someone say that the book came out in just 2 months, because writing a historical book is very challenging. You need to get the dates right. You need to really study on it. You were not just writing any fiction. You were not just writing a
Let me
story.
interrupt you. Let me interrupt you, Navreet, about the dates. The dates. Yes, the novelist, the writer of fiction, the creative writer has to be particular about dates. But if the creative writer goes wrong somewhere, then there's that poetic license, and you are forgiven. But if people in charge, the administrative setup, if the people who are in authority, if they make a mistake regarding the dates, then it is just not forgivable. It's just not pardonable. For instance, everybody associated the Scandal Point episode with Bhupinder Singh. And the Scandal Point episode took place in 1890-91. And soon after that, the Chel Palace was built. Now, in 1890-91, the Chel Palace was built because the young Maharaja who had eloped with a young lady, he wanted to show the Brits he's higher than them. So Chel is a little higher than Shimla, so he built his own palace out there, and that was in 1890, soon after 1890-91. Now, the historians, the state, the people in power, the administrators say that it was Maharaja Bhupinder Singh who eloped with the young lady and who made that castle, the palace. But Bhupinder Singh was 1 year old at that time. So, by any stretch of imagination, you cannot imagine a 1 year old eloping with a young lady, putting her on a horse and riding away to Patiala and then building a palace just to spite the Brits. No, that's not it. So there are these mistakes, these uh, terrible mistakes that go around. They are accepted as fact, but I discovered when I was reading up on the story, on the background, it was not Bhupinder Singh, it was Rajinder Singh. It could not have been Bhupinder Singh, right? So this is about the dates. Yes, please carry on.
So I was about to say that, when someone writes about an episode which has happened in history, particularly if it is not recorded. Now, there are two ways of writing in this historical fiction. One would be that you just pick up a historical background and put a kind of story which has just come to your mind, just taking the history as background. For example, World War One, World War Two, or the partition of India, or anything like that. But whereas your writing was more challenging because you were not just picking up history, but you were also picking up an actual incident which was also erased by the people. So it was harder to work on that. So that is where my next question comes from. That as a novelist and as a scholar, how do you distinguish between history and story? And where do you see the two merging or diverging in Scandal Point?
When you look at history, what do you have? There was this friend of mine who was doing her master's in history and then her PhD, and then she got into the central services because, well, she had her history on her fingertips, and she used to say history is nothing but story. And history, barring the first two letters, it is a story. So history is made up of stories. And the second question is, whose story? Whose story is it? Huh? Who is narrating the story? Who is telling the story? And the story will change according to the teller. So if it is the winner, if it is the person in power who's telling the story, you will get a different story. And if it is the oppressed or the weak or the powerless who's telling the story, it will be a different story altogether. Right? So, well, this is what happens. So history is not 100% reliable, but there are certain facts that happened. That we know that the partition of India took place. We know that India got independence. We know that the Brits ruled us for so long. So these are the givens which we cannot alter. But the story, when it is narrated, can be from any other point of view. Right. So what was your question, Navreet?
So my question was that how do you see distinguish between history and story, and where do you see both of these merging or diverging in Scandal Point?
Mhm. Now, so I had certain clues, but I did not have the rest. So with the help of the imagination, then I filled up all the blanks, right? And of course, there is always that disclaimer that writers fall back on. This is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to any event or characters, living or dead, is purely coincidental. So you can put this disclaimer and go scot-free. And if somebody says, you have said this and this is not true, but I never wanted it to be true. You can play very innocent, and well, you can avoid a lot of unpleasantness by passing it off as fiction. And in any case, this is something that history did not want to perpetuate, that people in power did not want to perpetuate, because the British would not like to announce that, one of their women had been abducted, or this is what they said, abducted by one of their vassal kings. And the Patiala family also would not like to say that they had done something outrageous, like, brought home a young English woman. So there were reasons why the story was completely pushed under the carpet, and well, they would not like it to surface at any time. So one has to be very careful when dealing with historical facts. We hear that, whenever history is reworked into fiction or film, then there is always a problem. There are people who come up and say that, we are the descendants of Prithviraj Kapoor, we are the descendants of Mangal Pandey, and you have not depicted our ancestor properly. And then there are riots, and then there are protests, and so on. So these things happen, and you have to be kind of prepared for it. You have to guard against it also, right? So there were some blank spaces which I did not know how to fill up. So that is where the imagination came into play. So with the help of the imagination, making the whole thing plausible, seem plausible and possible. This is the story that I put together.
So the question really arises is that what exactly is history? What is history? Is it connected to the larger events which shape the world? Or is it the small little personal lives of the people who were considered to be important? Because here, does a person's personal life become historically important enough to be documented? But we certainly feel that it does become very historically important to be documented. That is why it was erased. So the very erasure, the attempts to keep it under the wraps tells us that yes, for all the people who are historical figures, the ones who are important, even the tiny bit of details in their lives become important. And sometimes they also are not just living the lives of creating history, but they're also giving up their lives in order to create history. They're giving up their. So how much then how does personal history turn into fiction?
I'll come to this question a little later, but let me just point out something that history students are aware of. The grand narrative. The grand narrative is an overarching story, and that overarching story would have a good number of little narratives inside. Okay. For instance, we have the grand narrative of the partition, and inside that grand narrative, there are lots of stories of people who made sacrifices, people who fought and died, people who loved and lost, and so on. One such story is, that Amir Khan film, Lagan, for instance, huh? Lagan. And there you have a small village, you have a handful of people. They are not fighters, they are not freedom fighters. They don't go around, you know, uh, trying to push the British out of the country, but in their own way, they are fighting a battle for survival. And that battle of survival becomes one small cog in the wheel. It becomes one small story in a grand narrative. So similarly, when you are uh, when you want to use history in your fiction, in your storytelling, you don't have to use the grand narrative. You can take a small element, a small story out of those big stories, and then work on that. It's like, we have the metafictional technique in literature. You have fiction and metafiction and the meta story and so on. So it is something like that. And well, the story that I picked up is something very small that does not have too much significance in the larger scheme of things, but still, for those two human beings who are involved, for their families, it is very important, right? Okay, now when we are talking about history, the point that you raised was the, the personal, the public history, the history of the nation, the history of the world, the history of a particular city, or, history on a big scale. But then there is also that private history, your history, my history, family's history, the history of an individual. That means the life experiences of an individual. Those can also be fictionalized and put into a novel used for creative purposes. So should we talk about that? Huh?
We can.
And most of the writers, they derive experiences from their own life. If you have to write a story, if you want to write a novel, You are not going to, look into somebody else's experiences and bank on that. You will probably tap your own resources, find a story, and or if you are using something from outside, you will see that it resonates within you. And when it resonates within you, you'll be able to write about it. We make use of personal experience, but when we write about it, we don't have to give it as autobiography. It doesn't have to be autobiography because we make use of the imagination in order to tell the story, in order to give it a structure. And then the point of view that we are presenting is your own point of view, my point of view. If I'm telling your story, I'm telling it from my point of view, which may be very different from the way you would narrate it, right? So there is that public history and also that private history. And all writers make use of their personal experiences, whether you like it or not, you have to admit it. In fact, when we were putting together the encyclopedia for Routledge, Encyclopedia of Indian Writing in English, we dealt with about 250 writers. And all those writers have made use of their personal experiences in their writing, which does not mean it is autobiography. It just means that they are inspired by the events and experiences that they go through.
Something
Yeah.
that does not sit well with a person like T.S. Eliot, who said that your personality does
Yeah.
not reflect.
Now we are going slightly off tangent when we speak about T.S. Eliot's impersonality theory. T.S. Eliot kept on harping on the point that the poet's personality is impersonal, that the poet has no personality, and it's wrong to study a poet's writings with reference or the writing of a writer with reference to his personal life. But Eliot was deliberately saying so because he wanted to hide his own personal experiences, which were pretty traumatic. He did not want anybody to know that he was suffering, to know that he was going through a terrible ordeal, right? So that is why he said, no, it is impersonal. No, it is impersonal. I'm not writing about myself, but the wasteland. Yes, he may have the larger picture in mind, the larger picture of the world that is in between those two wars, the world that is broken and fragmented. But it is also a picture of himself, his own life, which is broken, which is fragmented, and his own mind, which is suffering from a nervous breakdown. The wasteland was compiled when he was recovering from a nervous breakdown in Switzerland. So, in order to hide your own weaknesses, you say, no, it's not personal, no, it's not personal, but you bet it's personal.
We are all a byproduct, or we're actually a product of our experiences at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, Ma'am, do you feel, in fact, I feel that fiction does the work of humanizing history or humanizing the past. So, in what ways do you think that fiction is more effective than traditional historical writing in humanizing the past?
History would be just facts and figures, dry facts and figures, and who would like to read them? But if there's a story there, suddenly you prick up your ears, suddenly you take note of it. Oh, a love story. Wow, that's interesting. Huh? And the story gives it it gives it a lot of attraction and you would like to read it. Okay. So if there's a war being fought, one party has to win and the other party has to lose. But if there is a certain woman and a certain young man, a love story or a personal experience like a mother pining for her son or a wife or her husband or whatever, then that personal angle gives it, makes it resonate with the reader, with the audience, and you can relate much better to it. So when we talk about, say, the atrocities perpetrated by the British in India, then it can be just dry facts and figures. So many were tortured, so many were put in prison, so many were arrested, and so on. But if you see a film like Kranti, for instance, Kranti, there you have the story of Manoj Kumar and that young lady, uh, Hema Malini. And it comes to my mind only because Manoj Kumar passed away a few days ago. So we have that. And it is a story with a human element in it. And it is the human element that draws your attention to the whole episode. Okay, this is what happened, this is how we suffered, and so on.
This explains the current popularity of so many historical dramas on the OTT platform that we have had. That we have
Right.
one specific story, people that kind of makes you understand the entire historical event. Just one story makes you relate to the entire historical event much more strongly, I would say.
I felt like that, when I was studying Lagan. I was writing a paper on it, and then I realized that, and I had studied in my history classes in school. I had heard about, the taxation being imposed on the farmers and so on. But that put it very graphically across in the form of a story. So the story becomes etched in your mind forever then.
So, ma'am, there is something very interesting. Your novel foregrounds characters who are often missing or are silenced in official narratives, such as the Viceroy's daughter. So, what challenges or liberties come with giving voice to these absences in history?
You know, you have studied feminism, feminist literary theory, critical theory. I have studied and taught the theory. And we are all living in times when we talk about marginalized voices and silenced voices. Okay? About 4 decades ago, there was a question, didn't Shakespeare have any sisters? Why is it that we don't talk about Shakespeare's sisters? Right? Because they were women. We have Christina Rossetti, who, yes, in the 19th century, hers was a name that came up, but that was only because her brothers were very kind to their baby sister. She was just 15 when they published her first book. So there must be so many women who were not allowed to speak up. And now they are speaking up, which is a very good thing. So as women, as feminists, what we want to do is we want to focus those voices, on those voices that have not been heard so far, on the voices that have been suppressed, erased, right? So when you hear the story of, say, the Viceroy in that huge building in Shimla, there is this Viceregal Lodge, which is now being used as the Indian IAA, what is it called? Institute of Indian Studies, Advanced Studies, the Advanced Studies Institution. That used to be the Viceregal Lodge. So when we think of that, what comes to our mind is, the Viceroy and the Vicereine and all that regalia and those parties that they used to throw and so on. But there must have been other characters also. And one of those other characters was this young girl who was about 15 at that time. Her sister was 17 and she was married at that time. But then in 1890s, 17 was, a marriageable age. So what happened to them? So you look it up and you don't find any leads. Incidentally, I followed the story of the book all the way to London and then to Ireland, trying to trace the descendants of the Duke, of the Viceroy. And I did meet some of them and talk to them. They were not really convinced that my story was authentic. But then, well, there is no proof. There is no proof. It is just lots of clues put together, right? It may be true, it may not be true. but by now it has become a sort of a legend that is popularly believed in Shimla. Incidentally, when we talk about stories, how does literature affect the popular psyche? Then it's very interesting that earlier everyone used to believe that it is Maharaja Bhupinder Singh who eloped with the viceroy's daughter, and he's the one who built Shell Palace and so on. But after my book came out, then the people of Shimla read it very carefully, and I was told that it's changed their thinking altogether about the entire story episode of Scandal Point. Incidentally, my book has gone into the fourth reprint. When I checked it last time, it had gone into the fourth reprint, and it is always there in the bookshops on the mall of Shimla. So there are some bookshops out there, they always stock it. And every time I go there, I check with them and they are happy with the sales. I get a little bit as royalty every 6 months or so, and I'm happy with that too. Right. So history impacts creativity, it impacts literature, and literature can also impact popular popular knowledge, popular belief, and popular thinking about a particular event. Yeah.
So the elopement of these two is at the heart of the story, and in fact, the story unfolds in a highly politicized colonial setting. So how does the novel engage with the intersection of personal desire and political power?
Personal desire and political power. The young man who is the Maharaja, he's just 19. He's just 19. And he would ride his horse all the way from Patiala to Shimla to attend parties out there. Oh, he was that kind. And the horse was imported from England. He had brought it with him along with the horse trainer. Okay. So he had brought them from England. So he was flamboyant and he would go there. And well, there was this young lady. And okay, he already had the power. He already had the power, but that doesn't mean he didn't have any romantic aspirations. Hmm? And this young girl, her name is Betty in my book. Otherwise, um, her name was Beatrix. Beatrix. And well, at that age, any young girl has romantic notions. And she was totally dazzled by the gems and the rubies and the glittering turban and the outfit that the Maharaja used to wear. So she was really dazzled. So do you blame him? Do you blame her for getting into this amorous kind of relationship and deciding that they want to run away together?
And he uses his political influence to gratify his personal desires in a way.
No,
And
he doesn't use his personal political influence. He goes there for parties and there's drinking and there's a song and dance. And I had to look up which were the popular songs of those times. Huh? And one of them was Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. Uh, and he says, I may not have too much money and I may not have a big car, but I have a bicycle built for two, and you and I would look very nice on that bicycle built for two. That's the song. Now, what I did was picked up that song and I changed the words so that this young man, when he's trying to woo the young lady, says, well, I don't need a bicycle. I have a Rolls Royce, which I got from England, and you would look very nice sitting next to me in that Rolls Royce. So why don't you come with me and be my queen in Patiala? And she's so dazzled. She says, okay.
so this next
So
question
you
is
have to, yeah, you have to create them as human beings who make the mistake of falling in love and running away. Yeah.
this question has just come up from what you've just said. So when you were writing this song or rewriting this song, I was just wondering, how does it feel to just, you were in 2011, uh,
Yeah.
writing about 19 years old, 19-year-olds falling in love. how do you really get into the element of that romance, and how are you able to bring out those emotions of 19-year-old?
Navreet, haven't you heard that? Dil to bacha hai ji, dil to bacha hai ji, thoda kacha hai ji. Huh? So there is a part of you which does not grow, and actually, if you want to enjoy the good things of life, you should not let the heart grow too old because otherwise the joy of life is over. Hmm? So you still should have a little bit of child in you, a small child in you. And yes, about those characters, I must tell you again, I'm digressing a little. I had a fellowship in the same Institute of Advanced Studies,
Yes.
and in the first, for 3 years, 3 summers, the first summer that I was there, I was, proofreading the final proofs of Scandal Point. And when I was walking around that institute, then I could visualize everything happening. That this is the place they used to have their parties. That is where the band used to stand, and this is where they used to dance, and the horses used to come up from here, and the chambers of the guests were upstairs. I used to imagine everything, visualize everything. The book was already written, but I could visualize it and I could actually hear voices. And then you look down at the terraced garden below, and that was the place where they met in the middle of the night when they had a chat. There was a party going on upstairs, but they sneaked out and they met on those in that terraced garden, and that is where they exchanged a few lovey-dovey, a little bit of lovey-dovey conversation, right? So, well, does this answer your question, Navreet?
Yes, it does. So now concentrating on the audience that we have today, since we've been speaking for quite some time.
Can you give me 2 minutes?
Yes,
minutes?
ma'am. No, no, I was not going for a question answer session. I was
Okay,
not going
okay.
for a question. It is a question that I was going to ask you to answer, which would be directly addressing the students of history. So that's what I was.
Mhm.
So I was just saying, like, what would you like to say to history students and teachers about the value of reading historical fiction such as Scandal Point in understanding the past?
Mhm. There is this saying, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Huh? So this would be very useful for people who in politics, huh? Who make mistakes and who go into wars and so on. You've forgotten history, and so you're condemned to repeat it again and condemned to suffer. But for people like you and me, for scholars and students and teachers, I think history is the full of stories that you can explore. You can read them over and over again, and every time you read them, you find a different dimension altogether. A different angle opens up, right? So if you understand history, if you know what is going on there, you try and get into the minds of the characters that you read about, and a whole new world opens up. For instance, if you look at Salman Rushdie's book, Victory City, he is he is giving you the history of the Vijayanagar Empire, and the ruins of the Vijayanagar Empire are to be seen in Hampi. If you haven't been to Hampi, you must go there. You must go there. There is nothing but ruins out there, and it just so happened that everything came together. I have also been a history student. I did a master's in history, but I didn't follow it up too much. Now, it so happened that I always wanted to go to Hampi, but then when I went there, I didn't realize I was going there because I had an assignment to a place. I didn't know it was close to Hampi. It was called Hubali. So I had an official visit there, and then they said, "We are taking you to Hampi." I said, "What, Hampi? We're going there?" And so we went to Hampi, and I just finished reading Girish Karnad's play. It's about, crossing the river Tungabhadra. I think that is the title, but it's about the struggle for Vijayanagar kingdom, right? And then I was also going through Salman Rushdie's book, Victory City. And again, what has Salman Rushdie done? He has taken the history of the Vijayanagar Empire and he's presented it, you know, he's used magic realism. Students of history would probably be familiar, not as familiar as literature students perhaps, but they would know this term, magic realism. So he has presented the history of Vijayanagar kingdom through the eyes of a woman who is who is deathless. She has been alive for centuries and centuries. I forget the exact number, but for many centuries she has been alive, and she has been a silent witness to all the generations that came and went, to all the rulers, to all the dynasties that were ruling at that time. So there we have the history of a particular place being narrated through the eyes of a fictitious person, history and fiction coming together, the way only Salman Rushdie can do that. Huh? And he's done it in Midnight's Children also. Yeah. What was your question? Anything specific that you want me to?
It's almost answered, but my question was that what would you like to say to the students and teachers of history about the value of reading historical fictions, such as Candle Point, in understanding the past?
See, I would say that students of history, of course, they read history. They must read history. And when you read history, it should not be a narrow segment of history. You should have a broad base. Now, more important, you must read fiction, historical fiction. Why? Because it will give you a different take on the history that you already know. It will give you the human angle. So, apart from the dry facts and figures, you will also know about some of the characters. Some of the characters who lived at that time, who lived, loved, suffered, died at that particular time. And of course, all literature students, I would tell them to read history, to widen their base, to widen their knowledge, and well, make use of whatever they read in what they write.
So my last question before we move to the audience. Historians are bound by evidence, while novelists are bound by the truth of experience. So do you see a tension between the two, or do you think they complement one another?
Again, the question arises, whose truth? Whose truth? Huh? So if you have a certain experience, you know the truth of it, right? In Shashi Tharoor's book, Riot, there's a very interesting passage about truth. You keep chasing truth. You keep chasing truth. You go through narrow, dark corridors chasing it. And at the end of it, well, what do you see? You find an old, wizened old woman, wrinkled and scarred and so on. And you ask her, who are you? She says, I am truth and I am beautiful. So whose truth are we talking about? We are living in times when we cannot afford to be judgmental, when we cannot afford to be dogmatic. So if it is your truth, I should accept it as your truth, which may not be the same as mine. But we don't have to fight about it. We can mutually coexist, right? Somebody asked me the other day, I was evaluating somebody's work, and I said, I do not agree with this point of view. So my friend asked me, are you going to tell that person to change his or her perspective? I said, no. That is his perspective, and I have mine. Why should I foist mine on him? Right? So we need to, I think we all of us need to develop this attitude, live and let live, laissez-faire, live and let live, and the world will be a much happier place. We don't have to squabble about your truth and my truth, your religion and my religion, my God and your God. And well, I'm sure we can coexist.
There are as many views, there are as many stories as there are people living at any given time. So, Mom, since we have a little bit of time, is there any passage that you would like to read to us?
I did not go through it, and I don't want to pick up something just at random. But can I talk about something else?
Yes.
Because this is the first time I'm meeting this audience. Maybe I may like to share something, huh? If it is okay. Mm, Give me a minute, I'll go back. Where is I? Yeah. So I'm trying to share something. And where is it? Yeah. Can you see this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I just, this is just a slideshow in the beginning. Okay, they're just two slides, huh? Nothing that will take up too much time. This is just some of the covers of my books that have been put together, and the covers of not the academic books. You see, I have written a lot of academic books and creative writing I've been doing for the last maybe 2 decades or so. So these are some of them, and I just want to tell you what I've made, where I've made use of history, personal history. This is Candle Point, huh? Candle Point. Oh dear, it's gone back, huh? Yeah, this is Candle Point. And the first title here, Spots of Time, this was actually my first book in which I made use of personal history. So a lot of my personal experiences go into that book, Spots of Time. And the next to it, Seduction and Betrayal of Cat Whiskers, is an academic satire where I have used an incident that took place on the campus when I was the chairperson of the department. There was this incident that took place. There was a students' protest and so on. I made use of that and I've used humor. So it is a satire. And then Amartas Avenue, this one here, this is again a campus novel which makes use of a lot of incidents that happened on the campus. So all the stories are put together. Then this one at the bottom, COVID's Metamorphosis. This is a collection of stories that we put together, and there are 27 stories altogether by different people from across international borders. So they've been put here, and they describe the experience of COVID, the way it hit them, the way it impacted them. So you can see I have made use of history in different ways, combining it with, you know, with the imagination. And this one here, bottom right, Sulagta Sansar, huh? This is the World in Flames. This is actually a collection of Hindi and English poems. I wrote them in English, then I translated them into Hindi. And this speaks of a forest fire that I saw, that I witnessed in the hills when I was teaching out there. You see, after retirement, I spent 3 years in Himachal. And while I was there in a university out there, there was this forest fire that took place. So these are poems which I wrote at that time, and then I translated them. So again, reality or history plays a major role in the creative writing that you do. Then yeah, then just let me, now these are some of my academic books. Academic books, they're not all. I could not find the covers of the others, so I just put these out here. Altogether, I've published maybe 26 books or whatever. Anyway, so this is this is how I have made use of realism in my writing. And then I want you to see this also. Now, this is a book that is going to come out very soon. And this is the cover. This is not the cover that it will come out with. This is just an AI generated cover that I made yesterday. And it brings in the main ingredients of the story. And again, the setting, I've given it a specific time and place. The time is January to March 2020. And what happened then? COVID? Actually, January to about June, end of the lockdown. So that is the time, and the place is, somewhere in the hills where I was working, right? So I just had to put this cover together to show it to the publisher. This is what I have in mind. Now you see what your designer can do with it. I wonder if you like the cover. How does it look, Navreet?
Looks nice. Of course, from the cover, I knew where it was.
Okay, now let's see if there are any questions, any observations. Huh?
We could also have you on the screen if there are any participants
Yeah,
in the.
why? Let's request the participants to come onto the screen, at least those who've logged in here.
Yes.
It'll be nice to see your faces. Welcome back, Ayush. How was it?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am, it's a wonderful lecture, ma'am.
Yes, Sumita is there, Neeraj is there. And what about the others? If you can switch on your videos, it'll be nice. Huh? Any observations, any questions?
Yes, ma'am. We have some questions on our YouTube channel. So can we
Yes,
proceed with
please.
that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Mm.
So thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful lecture about today's topic. We have various questions, and we will take one of them. It's asked by Shantan Shorter. He's asking that considering the novel's scandal point mediate between colonial hegemony and effective resistance through the lens of Leela Gandhi's ethics of hospitality and Frantz Fanon's psychoanalytic critique of colonial desire, in its assertion of exile, longing, and cosmopolitan melancholy, does the novel offer a subversive ethics of post-colonial intimacy, or does it risk romanticizing elite mobility within imperial circuits?
I think you're very right. It just does risk, it does bring in, it does romanticize a situation. But then that is the job of a storyteller. A storyteller is not a hard, crusty old academic who gives you facts and figures and tells you all the boring things of the world that you have to cram and you have to reproduce in your research papers. Huh? That is the job of the academic, and I have been an academic for 50 years. Hmm? In September, I completed 50 years as a teacher, and 2 decades ago, I decided enough was enough. Hmm? Because I've done all that jargon, I've done that, been there, and that's it. Now, you youngsters, yes, you can pump in whatever jargon you want, you can, or whatever theories you want into your study of a book. And some youngsters have actually taken my book apart and talked about, the colonial struggle for power and so on. But when a writer writes, this is not what he has in mind. The writer, when he writes, is just concerned with telling a story. There's a very nice poem by Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas, let me see if I can find it. Uh, by the light of the moon. By the light of. Just give me a minute of the moon. Let me see if I can. Mm, I can't find. And there's a poem in which he says that a writer. I don't want to spend time while precious time when I'm with you all looking for the title. There's a short poem. Huh? He says that I create my poems by the light of the singing moon. Huh? I do not create my poems. I do not create my writing for the sake of certain people, a certain propaganda, a certain agenda. Hmm? So a creative writer focuses on telling a story and not to promote any secret agenda. But yes, everyone, whatever you write, is informed by what you are, who you are, what you believe in. So something of that will definitely come into your writing. Hmm? But if you see certain elements of whatever Franz Fanon has said or whatever some other critic has said in any of the stories, then you're most welcome to look at it. Why? Because once a story is published, once it is out in the public, then the right of interpretation depends on the reader. So you do your job and I do mine.
Thank you,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Anything else?
We will take another question, ma'am. It's asked by Navreet. He's asking that in Scandal Point, how does the interplay between archival authenticity and postmodern narrative reconstruction challenge the established paradigms of imperial historiography? And how might the narrative strategy redefine the criteria for historical veracity within the literary domain?
That's again for you to figure out. That's for you to figure out, my dear. You know, as a storyteller, as a novelist, you have a certain framework. This is what you want to present. This is what you want to present. And then if that framework fits into something that some thinker has said, well, good for you, good for the scholar. But that is not my primary concern. Yes, you can read meaning into it, you can write a research paper on it. I'm just repeating what I said a little while ago. And I have found that poem, by the way. Uh, I found the poem In My Craft of Sullen Art. In My Craft of Sullen Art. That's the poem by Dylan Thomas. In my craft of sullen art, exercised in the still night, when only the moon rages and the lovers lie abed with all their griefs in their arms, I labor by singing light, not for ambition or bread or the strut and trade of charms, or on the ivory stage, but for the common wages of their most secret heart. Not for the proud man from the raging moon I write on these spindrift pages, nor for the towering dead with their nightingales and psalms, but for the lovers, their arms around the griefs of the ages, who pay no praise or wages, nor heed my craft or art. So this is what a writer does. He writes or she writes for himself or herself. And then you are free to interpret it any which way.
Thank you.
Is anything else? And I must thank you, Ayush, Palal. If you're around, it'll be nice if you can switch on your video. And all the others who've logged in, I must thank you. It's been a great experience talking to you all, but I wish you'd show your faces also so that I know who I'm talking to. And I hope you found the talk interesting, the conversation with this bright young thing called Navreet Sahi.
Thank you, ma'am, for this. It's a much more interesting topic of the.
Okay, Navreet, a formal vote of thanks.
Okay, I thought they were going to get.
Well, we can thank them and they can thank us. Huh?
Right, ma'am, right. Sure. So it's been a pleasure coming here and talking to all of you. It's also been a little different for us because we've addressed history students while we are more used to addressing literature students. Weaving history into the narrative and talking to you from a historical perspective was interesting to us. We enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening to us. And also, thank you very much for posing such wonderful questions at the end, which means and makes us feel very nice that you were all listening to us as well. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. We would like to see you again. If you'd like to see us again, please let us know. And thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you to Professor Jaidka, who was here and who's also a great writer. You can also access her other books here. And let me tell you that it is always a privilege to listen to people like her who have not just been not only because it's my private privilege to have been her student, but also as a human being, as a writer, as a mentor, as a guide, as a philosopher, as a scholar.
Okay, Navreet, thank you
Or
very much.
if you did get a
And
chance, you're all blessed. Thank you very much.
and I must tell you, I've always had an excellent moderator in this young lady. Thank you, Navreet, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ayush, Pallav,
Thank you.
Neeraj, who's on the screen, and everybody else who's logged in and listening. It's been great talking about my book. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.